Chapter 16, The New Sidewalk. When I got to the lake house, I couldn't park in the drive. Red had been out and dug up not only the front sidewalk, but the driveway as well. I was happy that the progress was beginning. Soon, I thought, new driveway, new sidewalk. I stayed up way past midnight, hitting every people search website I could find. Whitepages.com, Intellius.com, 411.com, Spokio.com, BeenVerified.com, Anywho.com. I knew from the get-go that it was probably hopeless, but I tried anyway. All I could think of was, how could you do this to me, Marlon Cooper? How could you get yourself murdered by a man with such a common name, Robert Brown? Really? There were 3 Robert Browns within 30 miles of Morgan, all under 50 though, too young. One in Dodge City who fit the profile of 80 plus. I tried imagining the phone conversation with a nurse at an assisted living center or maybe a daughter caretaker. Does Mr. Brown have all his fingers? Could you go and check for me, for sure? No, that wasn't going to work. I went to bed, very tired. About 2 a.m. I woke up, not really sure why. I thought I heard something, but I often have heard things that weren't there at the lake house. I saw the glow of a flashlight through the west window of the TV room. Someone was in the back, I whispered to myself. Trying to be quiet, I slowly worked my way to the kitchen so I could get to the back door. I came around the corner and froze. In the dark, just a few feet outside the back door, was someone shining a flashlight slowly back and forth. The beam traced the ground where the slab had been. For a minute I thought I was dreaming. I reached out in the dark to the counter where a flashlight should have been. No luck. Maybe in the drawer, I thought. Didn't I see it there earlier? I pulled the drawer out carefully, but it made enough noise to startle the intruder. The flashlight went out, and in the shadows I could see the person running to the west around the garage. I made the quick calculation that I could intercept him by going out the front door and began running toward the front of the house. I came flying out and saw him running across the lawn, not yet to the road. He was small, very small, and I, in my mind, thought, I can catch him. I yelled, "Hey!" Then my foot caught a piece of the sidewalk that Red had pulled up earlier, and I went flying. I hit the ground hard, and the wind went out of me. Before I could look up, I heard the sound of a pickup truck tearing away down the side road to the dam. It backfired as it shifted into second. It took me a while to regroup. My head hurt. I said out loud. I stood up and took inventory of my parts. Nothing broken. I went back into the house, checked my face in the bathroom mirror. Just some dirt on the forehead, no blood. I walked through the kitchen, grabbed the flashlight that had been on the table, and went out the back door to see what he might have been looking for. I scanned the ground for something that may have been dropped. Nothing. What was that person doing? Kids, I thought. Took me a while to get back to sleep. My last thought before drifting off was, kids do stuff like that in a group, not by themselves. That was no kid. I slept late. It was almost 10 when I finally got up. As I made coffee, I realized I was a bit confused as to what day it was. That had started happening more and more to me during the COVID lockdown. I had to think back through the week. Monday, I found the town band photo. Tuesday, Phyllis gave me a name. Thursday, I met the undersheriff, Thomas Cowan. Friday, I met Annie and found the brush. Saturday, we flew to Topeka. Sunday, I told Angela about the finger. Monday, last night, I met Tony Corello. I called Jean and we talked for a long time. I'd been holding back some info, and now she would know everything. "So it's definitely Marlon Cooper? So now you can tell his daughter?" she said. "You know, the sheriff doesn't want to yet, not sure why. Maybe there are strict guidelines for notification of death." "How much have you told Maxine?" "Not much, really." There was a pause. "I think we need to tell her." "I wonder if she knew Marlon Cooper." That's when I realized I had overlooked a good source for clues. "Don't tell her that they might have run prostitutes out of the cabin." "So you think she'll be bothered by that, but not bothered by the fact that a dead man laid under the slab outside her back door for 71 years, with a bullet hole in his head and another man's finger in his mouth?" Jean always had a better slant on these things than I did. "Yeah, you're right. She needs to know it all." I relinquished all authority in the telling Maxine department to Jean. She assured me, "Mom's tough. She can take it." "So, now that your crime sleuthing has hit a dead end, what's on the docket in terms of fixing up 3 Lakeview Drive?" "Concrete, new driveway, new sidewalk," I announced almost in a fanfare. "Excellent. Make it so, Captain." We said our goodbyes. Just as I hung up, I heard Red out in the front with his backhoe. He was loading the pieces of concrete that I had tripped over the night before into his pickup. I went out and yelled, "So, no bones this time?" He didn't register much of a reaction, but that's okay. I was used to having my jokes ignored. I was a teacher. He told me he would have the grade fixed and the forms ready later that day, or the day after by noon at the latest. Realizing that I was behind schedule and it was my job to order the concrete, I called Penny's, assuming I could take care of it on the phone. Red's backhoe was loud, so I moved into the house. "Penny's concrete," a gruff voice answered. "Is Penny there?" "Just a second." Then away from the phone, the gruff man called, "It's for you, Penny." "Hello." Penny's voice was flat and dry, almost chilly. "This is Michael Newman. I've been out there a couple of times. Finally ready to order my concrete. And then I made the order, 8 yards, like she had recommended. When do you want it delivered?" "When's your earliest?" I said, trying to be cheerful. "Tomorrow, 1 p.m. to 3 p.m. I stopped for a minute and thought. Red said he would be done by noon tomorrow at the latest. Then out loud, "Let's try that, tomorrow." "Okay. Address?" 3 Lakeview Drive. "We'll need payment in full before we can send a truck out." "Credit card?" I asked. In almost a monotone. "I think I told you last time, cash or check, no credit cards, debit cards, PayPal, or Bitcoin." "I guess I'll have to come out with a check." I was hoping she would say I could give one to the driver. She jumped in quickly. "Yes, you need to come out today or tomorrow, but we won't send a truck without payment." "How long are you going to be there today?" I was running my schedule in my head and then realized I didn't have anything going, really. But you never know what might come up. The last month had been one surprise after another. "Till 6 p.m., she said. "Okay, thanks, Penny." I thought using her name might warm her up. Wrong. She grunted, and then she hung up. Red was almost finished when I caught him. I yelled at first, but unable to hear me, he cut the backhoe off. Louder than I really needed to be, I yelled, "I have ordered concrete for tomorrow at 1 p.m. Can we get the forms done by then?" He gave me a thumbs up. I went into the house, laid down on the floor in the TV room, and took a nap. My dream this time wasn't at the house. I was down at the lake, at the swimming area. It was very dark, night, I guess. The water was smooth and seemed to reflect a dim light. I looked down at my feet and I could see I was standing on a dock that jutted out into the cove. I could feel the wood under my bare feet. I turned around to look back to the shore and noticed that the dock was now not connected to the shore at all. It seemed to be getting smaller. Far off, on the eastern shore, a bolt of lightning struck the water, and the water around the dock emitted a cracking sound. On the other side of the cove, I saw a small old woman in overalls and a t-shirt. It was Penny. Then, almost immediately, I made out another figure standing next to her. It was Marlon Cooper. They yelled in unison, "Don't forget about your concrete." I woke in a panic thinking I had missed my chance to get to Penny's before 6. I looked at my phone. Still only 5:30. I could do it. When I came out the front, Red was building the forms for the driveway. Jimmy was helping. Fantastic, I thought. At Penny's, I was greeted with the same assault as before. "What you need?" I thought, geez, doesn't she remember me? The idiot who doesn't know crap about concrete. I shrugged my shoulders and held both arms palms up in front of me in the universal sign that says, "Really?" Then reminded her out loud, "I was just on the phone with you this morning. Newman's the name. Michael Newman." "Oh yeah, I remember." Her tone was cold, bordering on contempt. I thought, "Lady, what is your problem? I'm about ready to pay the better part of $1,000 for a bunch of mud. How about some respect?" But instead I said, "I need to drop off a check for the delivery tomorrow." In silence, she grabbed a piece of paper from a wire bin below the counter labeled "Orders." She turned it around so I could see the amount due at the bottom. She pointed with her finger at it. $865. I started writing the check and tried to make small talk. "Business been good?" Same as usual. She seemed irritated at being required to make conversation, but relented for this time of year. I tore the check out of my book and handed it to her. She stared at it for a minute, then almost accusingly, "This ain't the same address as the delivery address. Can I see some ID?" Pulling out my wallet, "Yeah, we live permanently in Texas. The house at the lake is our vacation home." She looked down at the order then, as if to confirm it officially. 3 Lakeview Drive for delivery between 1 p.m. and 3 p.m. tomorrow. That's right. After she read the address, the man with the gruff voice rolled his wheelchair to the doorway of the back office and looked at me. He gave me a strange smile. I smiled back just to be friendly. Then I noticed that he was gripping a can of Coca-Cola in his right hand, and he was missing an index finger. I tried to make sure he hadn't noticed my stare. I felt my hand start to tremble, and in an attempt to cover it up, I unconsciously began shifting from side to side in a playful little dance. Might have looked like I needed a bathroom. I couldn't help myself as I slipped into some stupid patter. All right, finally getting this done. Can't wait to have a new sidewalk. Gonna be great. Okay, Penny. I appreciate it. Tomorrow, 1 p.m. to 3 p.m. We'll be there. Out of desperation to hide my nervousness, I added, Do I need to take the order form or a copy of it? No? Okay, great. See you tomorrow. I realized how stupidly cheerful I must have looked, and I imagined them staring at my back as I walked out. Even before I got to the door of my car, I was screaming inside my head, That's the man! That's Robert Brown! As I drove off, I repeated it out loud, That's the man! That's Robert Brown! Then I remembered his gruff demand, Where's my Coca-Cola? And I thought about the gun that Tony and Angela had given me. Chapter 17. Robert Brown. Halfway home, I gave up trying to drive and dial my cell phone at the same time. So to be safe, I pulled off Highway 77 into a filling station that had long since been out of business. The pumps were rusty, as was the tin awning. I called Stern first, but his phone went to voicemail. I wanted to tell him, I found Robert Brown, but quickly remembered he didn't know about my sit-down with Tony Corello, and he wouldn't know what I was talking about. After the beef, Sheriff, Michael Newman here. I think I know who killed Cooper. Call as soon as you get this. I called the emergency number from the sheriff's office door. The deputy answered. Where's Stern? I asked. He's flying. He's trying to get some hours on instruments so he can fly in weather. Tell him to call Michael Newman as soon as he lands, okay? Jean, I thought. I need to call Jean. It went to voicemail right away. Damn it, her phone's off. They'll be watching Wheel of Fortune, then CSI. Might be 9 or 10 before she checks it. The airport is only a mile north of the lake house and on the road back from Penny's. As I approached, I saw Stern's car parked at a hangar. Couldn't miss it. 18-inch high letters, Sheriff, Morgan County. I pulled in, found some paper, and left a note under his wiper. When I got home, I went straight to the laptop in the TV room. At first I tried Penny Brown, no luck. Then I put in Penelope Brown. There it was, Penelope Brown, related to Robert Brown, lives in Hurley, Kansas. Hurley, I thought. That was one of the small towns to the north, close to the concrete plant. Makes sense. I called Stern again, voicemail. I called Jean again, voicemail. I looked at the time on my phone, 7:30. Still CSI something, Miami, L.A., New Orleans. Maxine and Jean will be watching that till 9 or so. She can't hear the phone, or she has it off. I called Angela next. She was driving back from Kansas City. I could hardly contain myself. I found Robert Brown. He's here. Not in Morgan, but close, Hurley. How do you know? She was skeptical. He's the guy, I know it. I saw his finger. I didn't see his finger. I saw his hand missing a finger, index finger. He gave me a weird look when he caught me staring at it. I really didn't know what more was needed to convince her. Wait a minute, Mike. I'm not sure that's really enough to seal the deal. What does Stern think? You talked to him, right? I tried to organize my thoughts. Okay, let me think. They have a finger in Topeka. They just need to match the DNA. Easy stuff. Just then I heard the engine of a plane. Like I said, the airport is close, and it was common that they flew low over the house. I'm going to see the sheriff. Gotta go. I hung up before I could hear her last comment. Mike, Do you have the gun? The gun we gave you?" I was out the door and halfway to the car as she was asking the question. Had I heard it, the answer would have been, "Yes, it's in the trunk of my car." I could see the plane approaching the airport now from the north. I kept my eye on it and almost ran into a truck coming the other way. When I reached the entrance to the airport, a gravel road over a metal culvert, I turned in. I'd been so busy watching the sky that I failed to notice that the truck turned around and then followed me into the airport. When I pulled in next to the sheriff's car, the truck pulled in right next to me, and the minute I got out, I could see who it was. Penny was driving, and Robert Brown was in the passenger seat. From my seat, I watched the plane approach like it was going to land, but then it only touched down and took off again. Stern is practicing, I thought. I got out of the car thinking I would be nonchalant about the whole thing. Maybe they have a plane at the airport. It was stupid, but I tried anyway. "Hey, aren't you Penny?" Looking at the small and weathered woman at the wheel. I hadn't noticed that Robert Brown was now standing at the back of the truck. He steadied himself with a cane in his four-fingered right hand and held a gun in his left. It was pointed at my head. "Get back in your car, Mr. Newman." It was now obvious that Robert Brown's wheelchair wasn't a necessity. He was old, probably at least 90, but he could move well enough. I got in the car behind the wheel. "Look straight ahead, Mr. Newman." I obeyed, but in the rear view mirror, I could see he had opened the back passenger door, slid across the seat to the middle, all the while keeping the gun pointed at me. I heard Penny yell, "Daddy, there's a note in the sheriff's windshield." "Get it," he said without taking his eyes or gun off me. "You drive," he growled. "Where?" I asked. 3 Lakeview Drive. On the short trip from the airport to the lake house, I tried to defuse the situation. "Mr. Brown, I really wish you would put away that gun. I'm not sure what you're trying to do." "How do you know my name?" he barked. "Well, I guess I just heard it around town." I was grasping for a straw. "No one in this town knows me, not anymore." And we rode the rest of the route in silence. Robert Brown had me park my car in front of the lake house. I couldn't tell where Penny had parked, maybe in the RV lot across the road. It was 8 p.m. and dark already. Before he got out of the car, he gave me instructions. "We're going to go into your house. I'm going to walk in kind of slow, 'cause you got the front all torn up there. If someone drives by, you're going to wave, like everything's normal. I ain't going to point this gun at you, but I got it right here by my side. I'll use it if I need to. Okay, let's go." Penny had caught up with us. "Penny, when you get in there, go to the back and cut the power. I told you where it is." I did exactly as he said, and a few minutes later we were entering the TV room in the dark. "Sit there," he said, pointing to the sofa in the back of the room. He scooted a chair down in front of the steps that led to the music room, which housed the little bath. He was holding a gun with one hand and a flashlight with the other. When Penny returned, he told her, "Move everything away from the middle of the room." The house was completely dark. He kept the flashlight on my face, so being sort of blinded, I couldn't see what Penny was doing or why, but I could hear it. My mind raced and began describing what was happening like they would on the news. The victim, Michael Newman, crime scene investigator, was escorted at gunpoint into his lake home by the suspected murderer, and then, since I really didn't know how this was going to end up, my inner announcer stopped. Brown sat silent for quite a while. I heard the sheriff's plane fly overhead. By the sound, I could tell that it came from the south and then headed north. It wasn't too low, not like earlier, and it didn't land. The sound of the engine faded away as he began to talk.
"So, Mr. Newman, tell me what you found under the slab out there."
He nodded to the west windows that overlooked a slab and now overlooked a trench. "I think you know what we found. I was somewhat sure that he wasn't going to kill me. What would he do with the body? There wasn't a new slab to be poured."
"Oh, you think I know, do you?"
You could tell he was irritated. I decided to be calm and let him know that it wasn't just me that had information. "We found Marlon Cooper's bones. I think you put them there a long time ago. I think you feel bad about it, and I think you want a chance to come clean about the whole thing. I don't think you want to kill me." I tried to appeal to his logic, if he had any. "That would only make matters worse. People know about this. They know about you." I looked at Penny, or rather her silhouette standing behind her father, and hoped that she could read my eyes that were asking, "How can you let him do this?"
"People know about this, huh? What people?"
He scanned the floor of the room with the flashlight. I decided it was better not to say, let him imagine that everyone knew everything that I knew, so I shrugged.
"So you found Cooper under the slab. How'd he look?"
I couldn't see it, but I could hear the same creepy smile that I saw when he was holding the Coca-Cola in his four-fingered hand earlier that day. "Very handsome." I went for humor, but Brown didn't like it. Almost yelling, he blurted out,
"He was a scumbag, arrogant, a son of a bitch."
Most people in the town might have disagreed. I was hoping to keep him occupied long enough for the sheriff or Jean or Angela to call. Just then, my phone went off.
"Hand me that phone."
His words were quick.
"Better yet, throw it here."
I did. It hit the floor, probably somewhere around his feet, but I couldn't tell in the dark. It was still ringing when I heard him crushing it with his foot.
"Let me tell you about Cooper."
He slammed his heel down on the phone one last time. Brown began his story.
"I married Penny's mother and we moved into this cabin. This house right here, the one we're sitting in right now."
He paused for a moment and then in a softer voice,
"She was pretty."
There was a long pause. I imagined he was remembering her face. Then he started again, louder.
"She bitched all the time. I tried to make it nice. I built all this here," he said, pointing with his head in the direction of the room behind him. "Put in that bathroom, made this garage where we are."
He waved the gun around the TV room and kept going.
"I did all that for her, and she still didn't like it out here. Too far from town, too cold in the winter, too hot in the summer,"
he said in an attempt to imitate a whining feminine voice.
"She was never happy. I worked long hours for Bruner, and I would come home and she'd be down at the Kingfisher."
He paused as if something was boiling inside of him. I decided I would try to distract him and stall for time. Surely someone would come to check on me. "So you worked at the quarry, A.J. Bruner's quarry? What did you do for him?" He looked at me blankly and continued with his train of thought.
"No, she didn't like it out here. She was a slut."
He turned his head halfway around and spoke to Penny.
"I told you about her, how she left us both. She was pretty, but she wasn't worth nothing."
He almost sneered.
"She was having it off with Cooper. I knew it. I think she was messing around with Corello, too. I hated them both."
I remembered the photo of the 4 men at the Kingfisher. "So you knew Corello?"
"He was a son of a bitch, too."
There was less anger now.
"He owned this cabin, I rented it from him. The only good thing he ever did for me was he let me add on to it, build this bathroom and the garage. I put the garage in so she wouldn't get wet coming in from the truck when it was rainy. I let her have the truck when I was working. That was a bad idea. I found out she was running around during the day, probably with the sheriff. See, being a sheriff ain't a regular job. He could run around too, anywhere he wanted, anytime he wanted. That's how I figured she was seeing Cooper.
What happened on Easter in 1947? As soon as I said it, he shot me a look. He gripped the gun more firmly and shifted in his chair. I kept going. Cowan says the last time he saw Cooper was Good Friday, 1947. Chapter 18, Good Friday.
Cowan, that idiot, he laughed. He never even looked for him.
So what happened on Good Friday in 1947?
Good Friday, that's a funny phrase, he said softly to himself as he lifted his torso a bit and looked at me. She went to church in town that day. Good Friday service. I guess it was a big deal back then. The whole town would meet at one church at noon, sing some hymns, and one of them idiot preachers would preach. Wasn't my style, never been to church much. I didn't want to go, but she did. She got all dressed up, and I dropped her off. Said she could get a ride home with a friend. He grunted. She was gone a long time. She didn't make it back till 3 or maybe later. I'd been drinking that day quite a bit. I had the day off from the quarry, so why not? I was looking out the front when Cooper pulled his truck up, and she got out.
I was curious, and the story was calming him down in a way. I wanted to stretch it out. What was your wife's name? That was the wrong thing to say.
Don't matter, he yelled.
I remember Tony and Red saying that Brown was a bit crazy, and now I could see it. His voice grew louder, and he spoke more quickly.
So he pulled up, and he's all smiles in his cowboy shirt with the fancy buttons, and they're talking at each other. I run out. I was yelling at them both, and she come out of the truck trying to calm me down, I suspect. I didn't mean to, but I hit her. I hit her hard. Before I knew it, Cooper was grabbing me by my shirt, and we were going at it. I hit him a few times, and then he got me. He got me good. That's the last thing I remember on that Good Friday.
Then more softly.
Good Friday. That's some funny words.
Then back to me.
The next morning when I woke up, she was gone. All her things were gone, too. He took her someplace. I never knew where.
What about Penny? I asked, expecting him to explode.
She weren't born yet. She came along later, he said quietly, like he was thinking of something else.
I sensed he was calming down. Maybe I could get a confession and he'd surrender himself. I tried to push the story along. So then you found Cooper the next day?
You want to tell it?
He yelled, still boiling. He settled back in his chair.
No, I drove around town looking for her on that Saturday. I couldn't find her nowhere. I figured Cooper took her someplace. I didn't know where. Nobody would talk to me. I guess they heard about the fight and me hitting her. I knew Cooper came out to the Kingfisher most Saturdays, so I parked my truck up the road and waited till he showed up. It was probably around 8. I didn't know what I was going to do, but I watched him go in. I went and looked into his truck, thinking maybe he still had some of her stuff. It was locked, but the wind wing was open. Remember those wind wings?
I did remember them, and they were very practical. We could use them now. I couldn't see his eyes in the dark, but I was sure he wasn't really looking at me now. He went on.
I reached through and opened the door. His revolver was in the glove box, and I took it. When he came out, I made sure no one was watching us get in my truck. I brought him down here to the cabin. I told him I'd kill him if he didn't tell me where she was. He didn't seem scared. He paused for quite a bit and made that same movement of lifting his torso up a bit, the way someone does when they have sat too long in the same place. He took a long breath. The rest happened real quick. I got in his face and he grabbed my hand with the gun. We got all tangled up. We ended up on the floor. He was real strong, and even without that hand, he fought hard. I somehow jabbed my finger into his face, and one went into his mouth. Then Brown shouted, "He bit the damn thing off!" At this point, he turned to Penny. "Penny, do what I told you to do." For the first time, I heard Penny's voice. "I don't know, Daddy. Don't seem good. I thought you just wanted to talk to him." Firmly and calmly, he said, "Penny, do what I told you. Do it now." I couldn't see in the dark, so I didn't know exactly what was happening. I heard the hiss of water and gathered that Penny had uncapped the cold water intake in the little bath that was ready to hook up to a sink once Jean had picked one. I could tell by the sound of it that it was coming out fast, spraying the ceiling, then covering the new floor in the little bath. I knew it would soon be pouring into the music room, and not long after to the TV room. I could tell by the flashlight that Robert Brown had stood up and moved to the side of the door. Where was I? Oh, yeah. Now he began laughing. "He bit my motherfucking finger off, that son of a bitch. Man, was I mad. He tore it off the way a dog would. He was mad too, but stunned, you know, like he couldn't believe what he had done." Still laughing. "I shot him in the head with his own gun." The water was now running down the steps to the TV room. The floor in the music room sloped to the center of the house, and the slope was directing what was fast becoming a stream of water down the steps and into the garage that Brown had built in 1946. That garage was now the TV room where I loved to stay and where I had earlier in the day begun working on Connor's little stool. I didn't understand why Penny had turned on the water. Didn't matter, I thought, as I was caught up in Brown's story more than anything, and I asked, "Where did you shoot him?" "In the kitchen." From the beam of the flashlight, I could tell he was watching the water, lots of it, seeping into the carpet under his feet as he stood next to the doorway. His voice was now softer, almost thoughtful. "My hand hurt like a son of a bitch. There was blood. Some of it his, some of it mine. I wrapped my hand in something, can't remember, to stop the bleeding. I was probably in shock. It took me a minute to figure out that he was dead. Didn't really know what to do, but I wanted him out of the house with all the bleeding. I pulled him by the legs outside through the back door. I had the forms right there in place for a slab already. There was a mixer and concrete mix, and he was dead. I think I sat on the ground and thought about what to do for quite a while. It was too hard to try to get him into the truck. Then what? Throw him in a ditch? Or in the lake? They'd find him. He was laying on the ground where the slab was going in. So I just left him in there and poured the slab. I worked all night. Not sure when I finished. I forgot about his gun, until I went into the kitchen in the morning. I buried it out in the backyard. Penny dug it up last night, I think. That right, Penny?" She didn't answer. "This is Cooper's gun right here." He waved it. I couldn't see it, but I imagined it was a Smith & Wesson .38 Cooper had kept from his Army days. So that was Penny with the flashlight, I thought. Made sense, small person. The truck backfired. "Daddy, I don't like this. Don't seem right." Her tone was flat like a recording.
I thought we was only going to talk to him and scare him. Ain't there another way? Then in the same flat tone as Penny's.
Now, this is it.
He directed the beam of the flashlight to the wall outlet next to the Magnavox. The one with at least 5 cords coming out of it. The one that had sparked when I had unplugged the vacuum 3 weeks earlier.
I built this garage. I wired it too. None of these outlets are grounded. Very dangerous.
I couldn't see his face, but I could tell he was grinning.
Not up to code by today's standards.
He scanned the water on the floor with his flashlight.
I thought this would work. It's filling up good.
By now the carpet in the whole room was soaked, and although I couldn't see it, I could feel the cold coming up through the soles of my shoes.
Take off your shoes, Mr. Newman.
He pointed the light on my feet. What? I didn't know what was happening.
Do it,
he said in the same voice I heard him demanding,
"Where's my Coca-Cola?"
on my first trip to Penny's Concrete. As I took my shoes off, I tried to appeal to his humanity. Mr. Brown, I don't think you are thinking straight.
Oh, I am. And I was thinking straight 73 years ago. Isn't that about right? You're the one not thinking straight. You had to come along and do some digging. I ain't going to jail at my age.
He pointed with his flashlight at the outlet.
Yeah, I wired this, and it's crap.
He waded to the outlet and stood looking down. I thought maybe I had a chance, so I stood up fast and started at him.
Bam!
I was shocked, not only that he had fired, but also that the gun still worked after being buried for 7 decades. I didn't realize that I'd fallen back until I felt the cold of the water-soaked carpet around my back and shoulders. I stood up and shook like a dog coming out of a river. Was I hit? I asked myself.
Stay back. You ain't hurt. This thing still works, and the next one ain't going to miss you.
He waved the gun, then leaned over and took an extension cord that was plugged in and draped it carefully into the water pooled into the middle of the room.
Okay, Mr. Newman. I want you to get that stool over there.
Connor's stool, I thought. What stool? I asked, stalling for time.
That little bitty one right there.
As I walked to get it, I could hear and feel the water squishing around my bare feet.
Okay, put it right in the middle of the room. You're going to stand on that stool for a while. We're going to turn the power back on and we're going to leave. It'll look like you got up from bed not knowing about the floor being all wet and, well, you know.
He almost laughed. What a miserable, cruel human being, I thought, then asked out loud. Penny, you don't want him to do this, do you? Daddy?
Shut up, Penny. Go back out the back and turn that big switch on when I yell at you.
As he backed up the stairs, wading through the water, my legs started to shake. When he was on dry floor, almost in the living room, with the gun still pointing at me, he yelled,
Do it now.
The lights came on. Sparks flew for a minute out of the outlet. The lights dimmed for an instant and then came back on. I could hear the hum of the current. Seconds later, I heard the front door close. My legs started shaking again. Chapter 19. Wet Feet. The TV room is pretty big, 12 feet by 20 feet, I'd say. It was still pretty dark. Connor's stool is tiny, and I was worried about losing my balance. What little light came from the living room was enough to help me survey the situation. Everything had been pushed to the exterior walls. The sofa behind me was at least 5 feet away. The recliner had been pushed up against the door to the deck. It was at least 6 feet away. There was nothing I could jump to. I started to calculate that maybe I could put 1 foot in the water and then my momentum might carry me to the recliner or maybe the doorway. I remembered seeing on Mythbusters that you couldn't be electrocuted by a toaster in a bathtub if the outlets were fused and grounded. The TV room outlets had those two strikes against them. Did I want to chance it? I also remembered on some crime show on Netflix that two men in a similar situation were not only electrocuted but fried beyond recognition. I didn't want to put Jean through that, no sir. No, I would have to wait for someone to save me. I bent at the knees, remembering that you will faint if the blood can't get to your brain. How long could I last this way? Sooner or later, the sheriff will see the note. Damn it, I remembered Penny removing it. Had the plane landed? Maybe the hiss of the water had drowned it out. I remembered my dream about being on the swimming dock. I remembered the lightning and the crackling of the water. I tried not to imagine the sound my body would make when I fell into the water. Would it hurt? For how long? I caught myself. Can't think this way. I tried to occupy my mind somehow so I wouldn't start shaking and lose my balance. I went through the alphabet and tried to come up with a city for each letter. Atlanta. Boston. California. No, that's not a city. Caldwell. Denver. E. Damn it. What starts with E? What starts with E? El Paso. F. Fredonia, small town in Kansas. Gardner. Houston. Idaho. No, dang it. Inverness. Is that a city? J. I thought of Jean. Damn, how do I get out of this? I kept going. J. Johannesburg. Am I limited to U.S. cities? Yes. Okay. Oh, yeah. Jonesboro. Dr. Kraft. K. Kennebunkport. Lawrence. Manhattan. Kansastown. That's right. Newton. Ottawa. Potwin. Q. Darn. Q. Quebec. Okay, not just in Kansas. I looked down. How deep can this water get? R. I was starting to lose hope when I heard the front door open. I called out, "Sheriff, that you?" There was no response. After a minute, all the lights went out. It was pitch black once again. Had Robert Brown come back to shoot me? I heard Penny's small voice in the dark. "It's okay, you can come out now. It ain't going to shock you." I didn't move. What's going on? I thought. I saw the beam of flashlight go into the little bath. In a second, the hissing stopped. She said it again. "It's okay now. It ain't going to shock you." I kept my place on Connor's stool in the dark and could make out Penny on her knees tightening the connection to the water line. She quickly came into the TV room, sloshing through the water, opened the door to the deck, and like a dam bursting, the water ran out. I was stunned and just watched her. Next, she went to the outlet by the Magnavox, found the cord Robert Brown had draped on the floor. She pulled it out of the socket, then unplugged all the cords. She turned to me in the dark and said, "Just to be safe." And then she headed to the kitchen. I followed in the dark. Then I saw the flashlight go out the kitchen door, and in a minute the lights were back on. There was a pause, and then Penny, flashlight in hand, came back into the kitchen. She stood staring at the floor, then in a tone you would use to announce that you had taken out the trash, she said, "I killed him. He wasn't any good." She sat down in a chair. Her clothes were wet from the spray in the little bath. She looked at me. Sorry. And then as an afterthought, I wouldn't go back in there until it's all dry. Okay. I had no words. She shed no tears. After a long silence, I asked the simplest question and the only question in my mind. What happened? She talked slowly, without emotion. It didn't all come out that night, but over conversations I had with Penny in jail over the next few months, this is what I learned. Penny's mom was a woman from Wichita named Madeline Stowe, who had worked at the Durant where she met Robert Brown. After a brief courtship, they married. When she left Brown on that Good Friday, she was pregnant. Before she delivered Penny, Madeline moved in with relatives in Wichita, an aunt and uncle, Robert and Betty Stowe. Shortly after Penny was born, Madeline moved to California, and although she promised to return to get her daughter, it never happened. Robert Brown tracked Penny down and took her from the Stowes when Penny was 3 years old. They was okay, the Stowes, but I don't think they really wanted me. I was happy to go with Daddy as best I can remember it. I am not sure if Penny was abused. A psychologist would have to determine that. But she certainly wasn't nurtured. Penny and her father moved around quite a bit. When I asked where they had lived, I was shocked at how nomadic their life had been for many years. Topeka, Beloit, Smith Center, Russell, Buckland, Osage City, Alma, Cottonwood Falls. She would try to rattle them off, then give up and say, "Can't remember them all." We eventually ended up in Hurley and started the business. According to Penny, her dad did construction and some bad stuff. When I pressed her, "I'm not sure, but he got caught and he went to jail 2 times. Later, after a bit of research, I found that Robert Brown had numerous arrests and 2 convictions, twice for assault with a deadly weapon. He did 3 years at El Dorado Correctional Facility and 15 months in the Johnson County Jail. She was only 16 when he did his first stretch. I asked her what happened to her then. I got by on my own. I worked. I quit school. No one seemed to care that I didn't go. Never really liked it anyway. Somewhere in the 90s, Robert got the idea to start a concrete business. Robert, as a felon, had trouble with licenses and bank loans, so everything was in Penny's name, Penny's Concrete. All of this came out, like I say, over the months when we visited her in the Morgan County Jail. That had been her sad life, more or less. The details of the evening when I was almost electrocuted standing on Connor's stool were revealed in the time it took for the sheriff to show up. As she sat in the kitchen, her overalls still wet from the little bath, she looked at me. "Mr. Newman, before tonight, I didn't know any of that about my daddy killing that Cooper guy. He was a sheriff, right?" I nodded. "No, Daddy told me you were someone he met in prison who was trying to settle a score. Didn't seem right, but I always did what he wanted me to do. If I didn't, he'd get mean. So I didn't know any of that till I heard it out of his mouth. I never really knew my ma. He only talked bad about her." She paused and turned her head down to the side, looking at the flashlight on the table. "When we left here, I felt real bad, like we were doing a bad thing, a real bad thing. I didn't say nothing for a minute, but then I started asking him to turn around and go back. I said, 'Daddy, this is wrong. We can't kill that man. He ain't done nothing to us, really.' He kept saying, 'Just drive, just drive.' I slammed on the brakes and he went into the dash and he hit his head on the glass. He got real mad and started hitting me with his cane. He called me a couple of bad names, mean names, and kept hitting me. The gun was on the floor, slid there 'cause I stopped so quick. I grabbed it. I pointed it at him and he quit hitting me. Up to then, I hadn't noticed that there was blood on the knee of her overalls, which were water-soaked from the spray. He started calling me names again and said, "You're just like your mother." He said I was worthless and that I didn't mean nothing to him, and he'd been better off if he'd never found me. He said he could kill me and it wouldn't bother him. He lifted that cane like he was going to hit me again. As she said that, she lifted her hand in a fist. This was the first time she had moved since she sat down. She looked up at me, and I must have been wide-eyed. Her eyes widened as they met mine, and she continued. He said, "You ain't even my kid. Cooper knocked your mom up." He started with the cane. I turned away and squeezed the trigger. I just wanted him to quit hitting me. He fell on me and said something. I couldn't tell what. I waited a minute to make sure he was dead, then came back here. He's out there in the truck. As she spoke, she didn't cry. There was no emotion other than sadness. That's when I realized that Penny's life had probably only been about sadness. I wanted to reach out and touch her hand, but somehow I knew that wouldn't help. Less than a minute later, the sheriff arrived. I was so intent on listening to Penny that I didn't even hear the front door open and shut. He was in the hall when I turned around and I saw him. He had a gun drawn, but it was pointed at the floor. "You all right, Mike?" I was glad he used my first name. "Your neighbors heard shots." "Everything's okay here." I tipped my head toward Penny, who was looking at the floor, and repeated, "Everything's okay now." By the time the three of us came out the front door, the deputy was looking at Robert Brown's dead body in Penny's truck, and Angela was standing at her car with the driver's door still open. She looked at the deputy, then the sheriff, who was leading Penny to his car, and then to me. I could tell she had no idea what had happened. "Angela," I asked, "would you ride with them?" I pointed to the sheriff and Penny. She nodded. I went into the house and called Jean. We had a lot to talk about. Chapter 20, Indian Summer. There are no finer days than those in early October in the state of Kansas. The sun is gentle and burns off the cool morning air usually by 10. Typically the temperature levels out in the mid to upper 70s just after noon. Nights are cool and sweaters are required once the sun goes down. But it is still pleasant enough to watch a small-town football game or cook on the grill. Leaves start to turn color but don't drop unless the winds kick up. Indian summer in Morgan has a distinct light and a distinct smell. I can't describe it really. Jean is right when she rolls down the windows and says, "That's Kansas." I still say, "Smells like dirt to me," just to make her mad. On October 6, 2020, we gathered at the Morgan Cemetery to bury Sheriff Marlon Cooper. Jeffrey Stern had moved quickly to get his remains sent to the local funeral home. The case was closed. Robert Brown and the man he murdered were dead. There was no need for the KBI to keep the bones. The Kansas Sheriff's Association paid for the coffin as Cooper had died in the line of duty. Someone lined up 4 veterans from the local Legion post to do the rifle salute. I can't remember who. It might have been Angela. They also would present Annie with the flag. Jean and I paid for the small metal marker that simply said Marlon A. Cooper 10/9/1923 to 4/5/1947. Veteran. So it was 10 of us in all: Jeffrey Stern, Angela Clark, Annie Cooper, Thomas Cowan, the 4 from the American Legion Post, Jean, and me. We all wore masks except for Cowan and the vets from the Legion. We had invited Lucas Frost, Robert Parton, and Stephen Barnes, but they never showed. Men from the funeral home waited under a tree about 100 feet away. One of them smoked a cigarette. They would lower the coffin and cover it after we left. Annie wore what I would describe as her church dress, and her hair was pulled back at the sides with combs. She looked and seemed good. Before the service began, she had thanked each person quietly and then stood and looked at the coffin. Thomas Cowan had been driven to the cemetery by a nurse from the center. He walked with the cane carefully over the grass and stood by Annie. I could see he was telling her something, but couldn't make it out. It occurred to me that he was the only one of our group that actually knew Cooper. I was glad he made it. We hadn't thought to call a preacher. I felt terrible about it. Then Jean volunteered, "I'll say something." And when the time came, she said a beautiful prayer. Jean and I had arrived early and walked through the part of the cemetery where Jean's dad and most of the Beckers who lived in Morgan were buried. We walked slowly, and I thought of how the last 5 weeks had been all about fathers and daughters, parents and children, and how those relationships hold the key to everything else in our lives. In life, things are broken and restored. I've thought of the Lakehouse and our efforts to restore it. The little bath still wasn't completed, but I knew Jimmy was out there working on it while we were burying the sheriff with one hand. Soon the sidewalk and driveway would be finished, or so Red had promised. The roof was next, then maybe a new furnace. The term "fixin' up" popped in my head. I had used it often. We're fixing up the lake house, etc. I never thought of the lake house as a broken thing. But you fix what's broken, don't you? So I guess it was broken in a way. It wasn't the fault of the lake house. It's just what happens over time. Annie and Penny were broken too. It wasn't their fault. Annie was broken by a father who was absent. Penny by a father who was present, but whose darkness overtook her. I think Annie could now hold the pieces together and go on. I wasn't sure Penny could do that, and I thought of her all day at the cemetery. She was still at the Morgan County Jail, and we had visited her that morning. Stern thought she would be awarded treatment at the state hospital in Larned. He was pressing the judge in her case to rule that way. When the time came, Jean said her prayer, the Legionnaires fired their salute, and then I played taps on Sheriff Marlon Cooper's cornet.